Hello guys and welcome back to the channel. A couple of weeks ago it was my birthday and look at what my wife bought me. Yes, this is the C64 Maxi, not the Mini, but the new C64 from Retro Games Ltd, sometimes referred to as the Maxi, with the real keyboard. Now this is not going to be an in-depth review of the unit as there are lots of videos on that already. But the main goal of this video is to compare the experience of working with a re-released version of the Commodore 64 like this one, and comparing that experience with the original Commodore 64 that you might want to pick up today, and focus on the differences like how to power it, how to load software on it, and how to hook it up to a television set or a monitor. And to verify if a brand new C64 like this one with HDMI and USB power offers the same experience as the original Commodore C64 did back in the day. And let's start with the box. So I really like the new Commodore 64 box. It resembles the old one quite a bit, as we will see later on. So let me open her up here. So yeah, really colorful box. The artwork here on the back also resembles the original box a lot. Let's open her up. And inside we have the main Commodore 64 unit, which is protected by this cover here. And we have a separate box which contains the joystick and some other goodies. So here we have the USB joystick for the C64. It has a much better feel to it than the original C64 mini joystick due to the micro switches. We also have an HDMI cable, micro USB cable, USB power adapter, and a quick guide. Now, in terms of reproducing an original Commodore 64, this unit is spot on. I mean, the keyboard is nice. It looks exactly the same as the original C64. I will be comparing the keyboard with an original one, but yeah, really impressed. On the side, we have 3 USB ports and the power button. A bit disappointed that they didn't go for the, rocker switch that the original one had, but not a deal breaker. Nothing on the other side. And on the back, a power input, HDMI output, and a 4th USB port. And here we have the power LED. So the C64 also comes with a quick guide, multilingual. There isn't really a whole lot of information here, some caution and warnings, and then a couple of pages on how to set things up, what all the ports are all about, how to do the initial setup, and that's basically it. And a vast improvement over the Commodore 64 Mini is this micro switch joystick. Although it looks very similar to the one that came with the Commodore 64 Mini, this is a totally different ball game. This feels a lot sturdier. It feels a lot better in your hand. Obviously, it has the micro switches, which is really nice. The buttons feel nice. Overall, a vast improvement of what we saw with the Commodore 64 Mini. I even had my Commodore 64 Mini joystick shaft completely break off, and the plastic shaft was held on by the tiniest of screws, and even with mild gaming it just couldn't cope, so it was a horrible experience. And I'll let you know my experience with the new joystick by the end of this video. And we also have an HDMI cable included, which is really nice, so we can hook it up directly to our television set. And it also comes with this USB power adapter, 5-volt output, 1000 milliamps, micro USB cable to hook it up to the main unit. For video, all we need is an HDMI capable device. I initially tried to use my HDMI monitor, but then obviously this one doesn't have a speaker, so that's kind of pointless. So you will need to hook it up to either an HDMI monitor which has built-in speakers and that can pass through the sound over HDMI, or you will hook it up to your television set. But hooking it up is very simple. Just connect the HDMI cable from the HDMI output of your Commodore 64 to the television. And after starting the Commodore 64, we enter the main screen where we see all the games and are welcomed by a nice soundtrack. So here we can scroll through the games, select a game, and start playing pretty much right off the bat. So in terms of ease of use, this pretty much tops it. You can also configure it to load up basic by default, but I guess most people will use this carousel. So loading games is super fast, especially when comparing it to an actual Commodore 64 experience. So in a couple of seconds you will be able to play your favorite games off of this Commodore 64. But now, how does the new Commodore 64 compare to the original Commodore 64? Well, I'm lucky enough to have a couple of them, and there has been a lot of debate about whether they got the coloring right. Now I have to say I haven't seen two Commodore 64s yet that have the same color. I think it matches up pretty good, especially if you look at the top left one, which I think resembles some of the original colors pretty well. Now in terms of keyboard, I think it's pretty good. It sounds a little bit more shallow or hollow compared to the original Commodore 64s, but yeah, all in all they did a really good job. And also in terms of overall design, it's spot on. I mean, it looks absolutely identical. Obviously it has different connectors, but so it's really good. There are some subtle differences. For example, here I noticed that these little outlines here look a little bit different on the original Commodore. And also, obviously, on the back we have fewer connectors, because here we have the cartridge connector, the RF antenna connector, the video output, the serial cable, floppy connector. So let's focus on the USB power adapter. So included in the box is this power adapter, 5-volt output, 1000 milliamps. You get the micro USB cable to go with it. And to set everything up, you just plug in the USB power adapter, hook up the USB cable, and attach it to your Commodore 64. Easy peasy. Now, when you get an original Commodore 64, you will probably get a power supply like this one. And this one uses this DIN style connector with 4 pins, 2 of which provide the DC voltage and the other 2 provide AC voltage. And these power supplies are known to kill Commodore 64s because, as with age, resistor values or power regulators inside of the power supply start to drift or go faulty, it is possible that they will output dangerous voltages to your Commodore 64, burning all of the chips which are directly connected to it. So you always need to be very careful with those. So one way to check if your power supply is still good is to hook it up to your multimeter. And as I said, there are 4 pins on the DIN connector. The bottom 2 pins are the DC output voltage and the top 2 pins are the AC output voltage. So I'm going to set my multimeter to DC voltage and I am going to measure the 2 bottom pins here. And we should get somewhere around 5 volts. So we're getting 5.27 volts here, which is okay. Now, if I put my multimeter to AC and I check the top 2 pins, I should get somewhere around 9 volts. Here I'm getting 11.4, but this is because the power supply doesn't have any load attached to it. So as soon as there is load attached, the voltage will drop. So this power supply will probably be just fine. So, moment of truth. Hopefully we won't see any magic smoke appearing. So let's turn on the Commodore 64 with this power supply and we should see the red LED light up. And as you can see, it is working fine. Another difference between the new and the old Commodores is the video output. So the new one supports HDMI and only HDMI. So with a simple HDMI cable, you can hook it up to a monitor or a television set very easily. With the original Commodore 64, you have multiple options. On the back, you have an audio and video connector here, plus an RF antenna output, which can be used for audio and video. Now with it goes a lot of different cable options that you have, ranging from an RF antenna cable to a SCART connector. You have different audio cables that you will need. If you don't have SCART, you can use a standard composite video output cable. So you have lots of different options. And that's what makes it difficult, of course. Because not only do you need to know all of these different formats, but you also need to have either a television set or a monitor that is compatible with them. As opposed to with the new C64, all you need is the HDMI cable. So that's really simple. Now on the joystick, I already showed you the micro switch enabled joystick that comes with the C64, which is USB based, meaning that you can add other controllers as well. Now it's clear that the C64 joystick is heavily inspired by the original joystick that was often used with a Commodore 64. Although the original one didn't use micro switches, but it does resemble the new one quite a bit. And if you have an original Commodore 64, it's possible that you will have one of these joysticks here. These were very popular back in the day. Obviously, they're not using USB, but they're using a 9-pin connector, which was very popular back in the day. You could use these joysticks on Atari, on Amiga. So if you do decide to pick up an original Commodore 64, make sure you have one or more joysticks. I also wanted to show you the box of the original Commodore 64 that looked like this. And as you can see, they did a great job of mimicking the old C64 box. So it pictures the main unit in roughly the same position. Obviously the branding is different. Here we have the Commodore 64 with the Commodore logo on the bottom, but we have the two screens here. Yeah, so really nice job in mimicking the original box artwork. And on the back we see a similar thing. So the Commodore C64 is positioned pretty much the same way. Obviously it has a different feature set now. But yeah, really nice that they were able to reproduce the feel of the old box to some degree. Now the old box did include this styrofoam. And if you pick up one of these old Commodore 64s, and if you want to have a box which is well preserved, you need to check that styrofoam, because for example on my unit, on the one side it's actually pretty good, although the box is a little bit beat up. But as you can see on the other side, it's missing a giant piece of styrofoam, which is not that big of a deal if you put it on display in a strategic place or corner. So yeah, a little bit of a shame, but still pretty happy that I have a boxed original Commodore 64. Because it's always nice to see how they added the feature set here, like the cassette data set port, the printer port, the fact that you could add floppy disks, the audio video connector, the TV modulator for hooking up to a television set. So yeah, love these old boxes. And on the new one they try to do the same thing, but obviously they have a lot less to talk about because you only have a USB port, an HDMI output, and micro USB power. That's basically it. And on the side you have a couple of USB ports and a power switch. That's basically it. But now to the actual playing of games on this new Commodore 64. So immediately when you start, you get this game carousel where you have lots of games to choose from. You just select one and you start playing right away. So it's very easy. You don't have to worry about getting software or floppy disks or whatever. If you want additional games, you can just put them on a USB thumb drive. If you add it, it will automatically add to the user interface. You can select it, and then you will see all of your other Commodore 64 game images which are on your USB stick. So you just click on the USB icon here, and you see all of your games, and you just need to select one and it will automatically start just as if it was in the original carousel. Because it's very likely that the built-in games won't contain all of the games that you remember as when you were a kid, and you will probably want to download some older favorites from the internet and play them on your Commodore 64 system. Now, obviously, an original Commodore 64 doesn't have any built-in games or USB thumb drive support, but instead you can use cassettes, which were used back in the day to store basic programs but also games. So using Shift Run on the keyboard, you could prepare the Commodore 64 to read data off of these cassettes. So you would hit play, and then the Commodore would search for games on the cassette, load them up, so you would get these pretty loading screens. Sometimes the games also included some artwork while you were waiting, and after a long time they would finally start. An alternative to the cassettes were the floppy disks. So there were a variety of floppy drives which were compatible with the Commodore 64. This is the Commodore 1541 floppy drive. So it could also be used to store basic programs and games. So it was fairly standard to load stuff from a floppy and launch your games like that. So obviously, to get the original C64 experience, you need to have all of these peripherals. You need to have all of the cables to hook up these peripherals to your Commodore 64, and you need to have floppy drives and cassettes that contain software if you want to have the real experience. Now, a word of caution, because when I hooked up this Commodore 1541 floppy drive, initially it did this, which is definitely not a good thing. So I had to go ahead and repair it. So that's also something you need to take into account. We're talking about very old hardware, which is over 30 years old, and chances are that they will contain components that fail, and you will probably end up needing someone to fix them or fix them yourself. But even new components can break, as I am pretty sure that this joystick isn't supposed to sound like this, unless it has turned into a spray can or something. So obviously something malfunctioned here, and it's the screw which holds the shaft in place. So I wasn't doing any really hard gaming on it. I was trying to beat my high score in Iridium, so that might have put some stress on the joystick. But yeah, it's an easy fix, so we're just going to be reattaching the screw here. And here you can get a good view of the micro switches used in this joystick that make a very distinct sound. So time to put everything back together so that we can continue with some gaming. Because ultimately that's why I love this so much. The thing is very easy to set up. You can get up and running really quickly, and even my daughter enjoys it very much. So much, in fact, that she really wanted to be in this video, and that she did this very spontaneous cameo in this video.
Daddy?
Yeah?
Does it have desktop on it?
Yes, it does.
Can you play it?
No, I'm busy with something.
Please, Daddy?
Okay. Okay, so she might need a little bit more practice. And that about wraps it up for this video. So I'm really impressed with the unit. I really like the fact that for, non-hardcore retro collectors, this is something that you can pick up very easily. It doesn't have a lot of impact in terms of cables that you need. Everything is included in the box. Everything is standard: HDMI, micro USB, standard USB joystick. Very easy to set up, very easy to use, and it will get you all of that Commodore 64 gaming nostalgia without a doubt. Sure enough, having a complete Commodore 64 setup from back in the day also has its appeal, as you can work with cassettes, you can work with floppies, you can start collecting Commodore 64 games. But that's also means that you will need to have a special monitor or a CRT television set. You need to have special joysticks, cassettes. You will need to take into account that hardware will fail and that you will need to do some fixing. So in that sense, the new Commodore 64 is an excellent alternative for that Commodore 64 nostalgia. So I'm going to leave it at that for this video. I really hope you've enjoyed it. Please check out the other videos on the channel if you like retro computers. Please consider subscribing, liking, commenting on the videos, and I hope to see you guys soon. Bye bye.